In today's lesson, we're going to continue to have a look at the way that trade has such an influence on our everyday lives. And we're going to look specifically at an acronym known as TNC. So TNC is an acronym often used when learning about globalization and trade, and it stands for Transnational Corporation. So what is a TNC? The transnational corporation is typically a huge company that has its head office in one country, normally a developed or a first world nation, and its smaller offices in other countries. And that's typically in developing or third world countries. Technology advances have allowed TNCs to move their products, their goods and their services quickly to different parts of the world. And TNCs remain one of the biggest driving forces and main reasons that globalization exists in our world today. What does a TNC typically look like? This is a visual representation of what a TNC might look like in our global world. As I mentioned in the previous post, typically a TNC places its head office and management in a first world country. Normally this country is economically stable, they're wealthy, and there's a powerful government in place. When we think of the head office of Apple, for example, we would imagine the USA, Steve Jobs. Actually, have a look at the head office building Apple are currently constructing in California. It's pretty whiz-bang. It looks like an Olympic stadium somewhere. Whilst the decisions are made in these types of fancy buildings and in powerful countries like this, TNCs normally have smaller branches of offices in less powerful and wealthy countries. It is these smaller offices in countries that can go unnoticed by the rest of the world that the control of the manufacturing factories takes place. The factories where goods and services are manufactured are typically located in third world, poorer countries whose economies are not strong, whose governments can be corrupt, and whose local people need employment and can be exploited or taken advantage of in terms of pay, long working hours, and health and safety in their factories. We can see the different types of TNC within this visual representation. We've got the powerful head office, we've got small subsidiary offices and regional offices, and then we have the factories where there is cheap labour, where there are few environmental laws and unstable governments. And as I said, typically in countries that are developing or third world. Yes, TNCs allow us to have the goods and services we need and desire, the newest iPhone, the newest pair of Nikes, but there is a negative side to how TNCs work. TNCs may ask the following questions when they decide to expand their business on a global scale. They might consider things like, where is the country where we can charge the cheapest labour? Where can we make our product in the cheapest way to save us money and give us more profit? Which country has the friendliest government in that they can turn a blind eye to some of their dodgy activities in their factories? Which country has the cheapest land or electricity for us to build and run our factory off? Again, saving us money and giving us more profit and revenue. And where are we going to sell our product around the world? You can see that there's quite a quirky little cartoon in the bottom corner of the screen there. and two people are walking out of a sweatshop or a factory where typically the conditions would be very poor. And the gentleman says to the woman, "Another day, another dollar," just like the saying goes. And she surprisingly says, "What? We got a raise?" Which of course would be very uncommon in these types of factories. Let's consider the power of TNCs and globalisation in our own Aussie world. On the screen in front of you now is a pretty famous icon, which we may see on goods or items that are certified Australian made. That is, the head office and the smaller offices are all within Australia, and the manufacturing of that company's goods and items also take place within Australian factories. The big question is, do you really know what is Australian made? Vegemite. You can't get any more Australian than this product, surely. Well, you're right. Vegemite has its head office and is manufactured in Australia, but only since 2017, when it was bought back off a USA company known as Kraft. It was purchased by the Australian company Bega in 2017. Prior to that time, our famous Aussie Vegemite was owned by America. Tim Tams, chicken crimpy, they're clearly the best shape. We all know that. But did you know that Arnott's is actually owned in the USA? Whilst the biscuits might still be manufactured in Australia, Arnott's is owned by Campbell Soup Company based in the US. Holden, the quintessential Aussie car or ute. Surely this is Australian made. Yeah, you're right. However, whilst the head office for Holden remains in Australia, the Holden car is actually no longer manufactured in this country. Holdens are now made in the USA, Poland, Germany, Thailand, and South Korea. And if you remember the video clip and the slide that I showed you last lesson, which showed you where all the different parts of your car come from around the world, Holden is in exactly the same position here. Bushels. Hey, it even says this tea is Australian breakfast flavoured. Surely it's an Australian company? No. Bushels is actually owned by the British-Dutch company Unilever, and its head office is based in the UK and the Netherlands. Golden Circle, I mean, surely. What's that famous TV ad again? Nope. Golden Circle is owned by US giant company Heinz, and their head office and main manufacturing works from the USA. And finally, good old Uncle Toby's. This has got to be Aussie. Oats, surely. Again, Uncle Toby's was sold off in 2006 to Nestle and General Mills. The oats are still grown in Australia, however, but the company itself and the head office works from and is entirely based in Switzerland. So having considered some of the realities of TNCs in our own lives, we may start to ask the question, where are my everyday products really coming from? The table being presented to you now is a summary of the positive and negative effects that trade and TNCs is actually having on our world as we know it. So some of the positives to come from trade and transnational corporations are our easy and ready availability of goods and services and products in any country. Another positive is that goods and products and services are advancing all the time and developing rapidly. And that's really exciting for our economies and also for us as consumers and some of the futuristic products that we might have an opportunity to use. Another positive of TNCs and trade is that they do create job opportunities in poorer countries, and that's good for local populations who would typically be struggling with poverty. Trade also builds good relationships between countries, and this can come into assistance in other ways. Consider our current world and the global pandemic. We've stayed in contact with a lot of countries around us that we would normally have traded with, and we've been able to maintain good relationships with these countries and helped each other out at this time. Australia and New Zealand is a really good example of this. But on the flip side, some of the negatives of trade and TNCs are not supporting local businesses, farmers and jobs. If we buy all of our products and items offshore and overseas, what about our local farmers? What about our local workers in our local factories and our local job market? Trade and TNCs, manufacturing and production, is all adding to pollution and the ecological footprint we are making on our world. As previously mentioned, we're also wasting natural and raw material resources. Not all raw materials in our world are infinite. That means one day they are going to run out. And as our global population increases, so does our need for these products. What is the alternate for the times that they do run out? Another negative involves employees being exploited or taken advantage of, particularly those countries that are developing, who have workers who are being forced to work in very poor and squalid conditions in factories, whose governments turn a blind eye and perhaps don't worry if there is some corrupt undercurrent of low payments or treatment in these factories for these employees. And another negative that has become pretty evident to us over recent times is the impact of world events on trade delays. I don't know if any of you have ordered anything online from overseas recently, but the likelihood of you receiving that item from an overseas country at the moment is probably pretty unlikely. Because the trade world and the international world is so uncertain at the moment, our ability to trade with other countries, whether that be food or household products, has been delayed and slowed. And that means we've had to actually count on our own local jobs and businesses and farmers to supply us with what we need at this time. Another driving force behind globalization and TNCs is this idea of McDonaldization. This is a tongue-in-cheek term that refers to the way many parts of the world are becoming increasingly Americanized or McDonaldized. This refers not only to goods and services, but to the overall culture of a particular country or place. In a moment, I'm going to get you to watch the video clip, or when you've finished watching this video, of the different McDonald's foods that you can find around the world. It's quite a funny and interesting look at how some countries have aimed to keep their culture within the McDonald's product. At the end of the day, though, the product is still McDonald's. Why does this TNC have such power over the whole world? This is the last slide in today's video and slideshow presentation, and I will place this slideshow onto the Google Classroom post so that you can go back into the slideshow and watch the video clip on the previous slide, but also so that you have an opportunity to complete this activity on slide 14. There's not going to be a worksheet in today's post. Instead, we're going to ask you to answer the questions on this screen straight into your online workbook. You will need to pause the video here or go into the PowerPoint presentation that's uploaded on this slide, on this post for you, to complete questions 1 to 4. Please answer in full sentences and write the questions first before writing your answer, both in your online workbook. Before you have a go at the questions though, let's just have a talk through the geographical cartoon that we can see in front of us. This is a visual representation of the idea of McDonaldization, or the Americanization of culture. If we have a look at the image, we can see a number of quite funny and amusing, but at the same time, quite important icons and symbols of the power of globalization and American culture. If we were in class together, and we may be at this stage, I would ask you to identify some of the famous icons that you can see in this cartoon. I'll name a couple for you, but I also want you to take a moment to sit down, a little bit like Where's Wally, and study what famous icons you can see in this cartoon. On the ship in the background, you can see that there's a McDonald's flag being hung from the top mast. Coke bottles are being shot out of this ship. We can see that Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck are also making appearances here. So we have this introduction of the Disney brand as well. Cartoons can be used to make social or political comments about current issues. They are usually intended to engage, entertain, stimulate, and amuse readers, but they're not always funny. Cartoonists often use stereotypes to represent a group. In this case, Disney and other TNCs are being used to represent the groups pushing American culture onto other cultures and countries. Cartoonists also use images and symbols that are familiar to make a point, i.e., this war scene that we can see in the cartoon could suggest that American culture is taking over this small island of local residents. Based on that interpretation and a little bit of discussion about the cartoon, we're now going to ask that you move on and answer questions 1 to 4 in your online workbook. Remember, we'd like you to write the question out first and then answer the question to the best of your ability in a full sentence. The questions all relate to the cartoon, and you're very welcome to come back and watch this section of the video clip again if it helps you out, or simply read the GeoSkills Toolbooks box at the top of the screen. That will give you some helpful hints about how you might understand this cartoon in front of you. Hopefully you enjoy this activity, Year 7, and we'll see you next lesson.